What's up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Sabertooth number 5 by Victor Laval and Leonard Kirk. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down exactly why Cypher is low-key creating a new Hellions team, why a classic Sabertooth ally is getting a second chance at life, and last but not least, how Sabertooth's finale is bringing back a cult classic X-Men team.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
As I and many other people have suspected since the beginning of this series, once Sabertooth was finally able to break out of the pit, he really had no more use for his fellow compatriots Oya, Necra, Madison Jeffries, Melter, and Third Eye. Of course, he left them to rot in the pit, as I think a lot of people probably expected him to, but I also think that a lot of us were hoping that maybe he had actually grown and maybe he was actually trying to change. And as the saying goes, a tiger can't change their stripes, and as it turns out for the case of Sabertooth, he can't do the same either. He is stuck in this loop of being, well, what he is for the most part always been. Now, of course, as we learned in the previous issue, that the character Mole was working on a way to get the gang out of the pit, and while it does seem that it actually worked, it also worked a little bit too well. Magma did unleash her power on Krakoa to create some kind of a volcanic event that would get them all out, and pretty much what happens, as Krakoa is wont to do when it's in distress, it leeches energy, and of course Krakoa, being a psionic energy leech, it pretty much sapped every mutant that was in the area where Magma unleashed her powers. It rendered them all unconscious, so no one really knows what the hell is going on, except for everyone that was in the pit, as well as Cypher. And Victor escaping was kind of just a happenstance of that, and while Cypher letting Sabertooth out of the pit is pretty much not as much to do with Magma, Cypher getting the rest of the gang out of the pit is. Cypher is using this opportunity to make executive decisions. Cypher doesn't seem to be doing this in league with the Quiet Council, because at a few different points in this book, he doesn't really mention the Quiet Council. He's basically saying himself and Krakoa. This is a deal that Cypher and the island themselves are making with not just Sabertooth, but also the rest of the gang. Cypher, for those who are not familiar, he's been trying to keep the peace as of late. During the events of Inferno, he learned the dark secrets that Xavier and Magneto were hiding, everything regarding Moira McTaggart and how Krakoa was formed, the knowledge that in every conceivable reality that Moira has lived in, well, at least the 9 of them up to this point, the mutants have always lost, though it also stands to reason that Omega Sentinel revealed that in the timelines she's existed in that we know of, but maybe a couple, the mutants always win. So it's hard to tell who's actually telling the truth, who's lying, and of course, it being different realities, yeah, everybody's entitled to be right about this one. But Doug let Sabertooth out of the pit because, as Sabertooth pointed out, he was giving Krakoa a black eye. He was making everyone in the Quiet Council look bad. He was also starting to sway public opinion on Krakoa against the Quiet Council, letting the world know that Xavier and the rest of the council were doing wrong by its fellow mutants. Not only that, Sabertooth has a foothold now in Krakoa. For a guy not being psionically gifted, this guy literally created his own realm, his own little corner of existence inside of Krakoa within the pit, a place that, for all intents and purposes, doesn't actually really exist, but in Krakoa it does. He is literally giving Krakoa its own version of hell. Even after he's left, everything he created in Krakoa is still there. The throne that he sat upon, especially, something that Cypher is concerned that if anyone else who is down there in the pit would probably get their hands on, it could be bad news for everyone up above. Now, remember when this series first started, I talked about, I thought it was so weird that Orphan Maker, Nanny, and Toad weren't down there, considering this book came out after the events of Hellions as well as Trial of Magneto. But as it turns out, we learned in the previous issue, this book actually takes place right around the time of 10 Lives of Wolverine #1. So technically, this is all happening after the fact, and we do discover that Toad, Nanny, and Orphan Maker are actually in the pit. As a matter of fact, they are kind of recently appeared in the pit, and what Cypher's trying to do right now is, for one, he's worried that the other 3 mutants are going to try and do something with that throne, and if they got their hands on it, it could be just as bad, if not worse, as when Victor Creed had it. They would be able to manipulate Krakoa on some level that Cypher's just really not interested in finding out how bad it would possibly be. So what he's gonna do is he's gonna pair Toad, Orphan Maker, and Nanny with Oya, Necra, Madison Jeffries, Melter, and Third Eye, and create what is kind of low-key a new Hellions team. That's not what they call it, but that's basically what they are. I feel like the Hellions have now kind of cemented themselves as being a team that is representative of all the hard luck cases and all the trying to be reformed bad guys that Krakoa has, and kind of pulling a Demolition Man, sending a maniac to catch a maniac. That's basically what they're doing here. That's what the Hellions were all about. Well, on some level. But right now, the plan is not to bring Sabertooth back. Cypher has given them something that was very reminiscent of the skull that Mystique tends to wear on her head or around her waist, but it's actually something else. Whatever it is, they're supposed to use it when they find Sabertooth, and this is supposed to be what we talked about in the last video, being the fate worse than the pit. We don't really know what it is, and it's not exactly stated what it could be, but what we do know is that Cypher has no intentions of bringing Sabertooth back to Krakoa. He is not allowed to be on the island, and while this isn't necessarily the reason why, other than the fact that he has literally created turmoil for everybody on the island, the other thing he's done is that he has not only given the Quiet Council and Krakoa itself a black eye, he has exacted his revenge on Xavier. Now remember back in House of X number 6, Sabertooth, he did promise Xavier that he was going to get revenge on him. Not just him, but his children and his children's children, his entire line. He would get revenge on them. Now, he doesn't actually do that here, but he does get a better kind of revenge against Xavier, and that is killing him in terms of public opinion on the island. Now, everybody knows what was going on. Everybody knows that Sabertooth was thrown into the pit unjustly. Xavier is now looking really bad right now, as if he didn't have enough problems to worry with the Quiet Council already not caring for his presence and now only merely tolerating him being around. And now it seems the rest of the island isn't particularly fond of him either, and this is pretty much almost the same thing as what Sabertooth wanted to do to him originally. Yeah, sure, taking his frustrations out on Xavier, and while he might be able to pull one over on Xandra, I don't think he's gonna pull one over on Legion, but I think this is actually what he wanted in the end. He has basically turned all of Xavier's quotey fingers children, not just his actual blood children, but the children he has helped raise, the children that he has overseen all the way back since 1963's Uncanny X-Men #1. Yeah, they don't like him anymore, really. They are all starting to doubt him. Another thing we have to consider too is that the character Birdie is being resurrected. Now, we talked about Birdie in the last video. She was killed by Sabertooth's son, Graydon Creed, a guy who is, for all intents and purposes, despite being born of mutants, he is a whole-ass human. And for those unfamiliar, he typically ran with anti-mutant organizations since forever. But Birdie is being brought back, and Sabertooth is to be kept far away from her. And while we don't see this happen in this issue, we do know, thanks to Legion of X number 3, that Birdie is already back and operating as a counselor assisting other mutants with any issues they're having with mental health, using her abilities in similar ways to what she did with Sabertooth, but largely on a less problematic level, most likely. So that's yet another reason why Sabertooth isn't welcome back, because of what he did to her. Now, the information we get about Birdie is actually not thanks to Cypher. This information we learned from Destiny and Mystique, who oddly enough factor into this issue. When House of X number 6 came out and Sabertooth was sentenced, even after that, I had pretty much held the belief one day Sabertooth was going to get out and Mystique was going to be the reason why, because we knew Mystique was disenfranchised with everything going on with the Quiet Council, with Xavier, Magneto, the whole shenanigans with Destiny not being allowed to be resurrected. I knew at some point Mystique was going to let him out of the pit. Somehow, some way, Sabertooth was going to get free and he would wind up working with her to take down Krakoa as a whole. And while all of that didn't necessarily come into play in this issue, what does come into play is that Mystique and Destiny as well are responsible for why Sabertooth is off the island now. They didn't get him out of the pit, but they did give him a way to get free. Pretty much by not stopping him from getting away. Destiny saw something in the future, and she knows that Victor Creed is going to be responsible for doing something that's going to help Krakoa in the long run. And this basically brings us to that cult classic X-Men team that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Sabertooth, while he's on the run, gets picked up by Orchis, who has now gotten into the private for-profit prison business, and we actually saw a taste of one of these prisons in Fabian Niciez's Juggernaut number 4 and 5. It was actually the prison that Juggernaut had to break into to get his new friend and protege D-Cell out of. That prison is gone, it no longer exists, but these prisons are basically Orchis's way to make a crap ton of money, but also at the same time work with countries and nations that don't recognize Krakoa as a sovereign nation, and they use this as an opportunity to experiment on the mutants that they capture. We know that other than the dungeon, they had 5 other prisons, 2 others of which were lost. One of them being Station 3, which was for astral plane mining. Something tells me that when the Legion of X came into play, they probably came along and shut down Orchis's operation there. And there's also Station 5 that is mentioned, whose purpose is redacted and is also listed as misappropriated, which makes me wonder what exactly is going on there. Maybe this has something to do with Dr. Stasis and what he has going on the side. Who knows? We also know about 2 others. Station 2, which is for Chimera protocols, which makes me wonder if they have some inside track on what Mr. Sinister has been up to, or maybe this is more related to Dr. Stasis than anything else, or maybe Orchis is figuring out how to make their own chimeras. They do tend to have a lot of weird animal hybrids, very similar to the ones we've seen Dr. Stasis employ, and are very likely the same ones Dr. Stasis employs. Maybe these are their versions of chimeras. And we also know they have what is called the Infernal Nursery. We don't really know what that is either, or maybe this is something that'll come up more on the New Mutant side of things, since they're dealing with more of the things that are happening in Limbo right now. We also know that Orchis is working with another entity that has been redacted as well. We don't know who they are, but I can tell you, whatever it is they are, they seem to have a pretty long name, as it's redacted across 2 lines. But something tells me maybe this is in reference to someone that is not of this earth. It could be the Shi'ar Empire, for all we know. We do know that the Shi'ar are kind of against mutants right now, though they were recently at peace with them, and we know that a rogue Shi'ar operative has been working with X-Desk, so it's not that far out of the realm of possibility that this could be a thing. Considering everything going on in Black Panther right now, and Akili, the leader of the Hatun Zarazi's paranoia at going to war with Krakoa, it could technically be the Wakandans that's mentioned here as well. But things that are not surprising is that Orchis is working with the United Kingdom. We kind of assume this because of the whole thing going on with Ruben Brousseau over in Teenie Howard's Excalibur. We also can't ignore the fact that Azania and Kanan, they are both signed on to work with Orchis, which is unsurprising. They're both countries that border Wakanda, and Wakanda has a very weird stance with mutants anyway. And we also can't ignore the fact that Latveria is also on this list, and considering how over mutants Dr. Doom is at this moment, not surprising either. But the reason why this sets up an old X-Team is because after he has been incarcerated by Orchis, we cut to a shot of him later in a wheelchair, very similar to what Xavier used to be in back in the OG X-Men days, quoting a line that Xavier is pretty well known for, but paraphrasing it for this new team: "To me, my exiles," as he's surrounded by various and sundry other mutants. And while we don't see any specific mutants that are representative of any of the ones who have ever been involved with the exiles over the years, I do feel like this is a way to bring back some of those characters. In one of Destiny's visions, she did see something that related to the character of Nocturne, or at least it seemed as though it related to the character Nocturne, who is one of the OG Exile members. This could also lead us to seeing characters like Morph and Mimic and Magnus being brought back into the fold. Either way, the Exiles is one of those squads that, while they started off, well, technically they were more of an Ultraverse thing, but later Marvel reappropriated the Exiles to be more of an X-Men related comic, which many would recognize as the way that they were able to capitalize on Blink's popularity from when she was introduced during Age of Apocalypse. So this could be a way to get that character character back into the fold, even though technically this team did kind of devolve into becoming more of just a general team of characters, with many of the characters not even being anything close to mutant related. To me, it feels like Marvel is taking the Exiles and returning them back to the X-Men's corner of the Marvel Comics universe, with Sabretooth potentially being the leader of this new team. And whether or not this works out is a whole other story, but I'm very curious to see if they are in fact bringing back the Exiles. I'm excited for this because this is a huge opportunity to bring in some of those characters that we just haven't seen around. If they were to use this as an opportunity to bring back some of those OG Exile characters, which, to be fair, some of it would be weird. The version of Blink from that OG team was the Age of Apocalypse version of that character, and the morph that was there while he had the look of the morph from Age of Apocalypse, he was actually from a completely different Earth entirely. Even the Thunderbird that was on that team, that was not the James Proudstar that we were familiar with. This was a completely different James Proudstar. Not a single character from the original Exiles team was from Earth 616. So if they wanted to bring back some of those characters, maybe instead of dealing with multiversal shenanigans, maybe they could find a way to do it where it's the characters but the Earth 616 version, so you can kind of have these characters back but maybe change them up a little bit so they're not exactly the way they used to be. That'd be something I'd really be into. Honestly, with this new group, this could also be yet another way to incorporate the other team, the not Hellions, into this, because once again, at the end of the day, every last single one of them were exiled. So I mean, yeah, you could take the Exiles and refresh the perspective on it. If they decide to bring back the Hellions with the squad that Sabretooth was working with down in the pit, I would be 100% in for it. If they decide to go forward with a new Sabretooth-led team of the Exiles, I'm here for that too. You do both of them, even better. I'm into it. I'm in for a penny, in for a pound. But anyways, that's everything I want to talk about with Sabretooth number 5. If you're unfamiliar with the Hellions and you want to know more about that team, check out this playlist up here where I break down the entire series of Hellions. In the meantime, let me know what you thought about Sabretooth number 5. Are you interested in a Sabretooth-led Exile series or a relaunch of the Hellions with his current squad? Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.